Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Rent Prep for Landlords. It's episode 262. I am your host, Eric Worrell, and today we're going to be talking about the rise of the van dweller. So if you're not familiar with the term van dwellers, it's a pretty obvious term in itself. These are people who live in vans as opposed to living traditional lifestyle in a home or a rental property. But this is actually becoming a pretty big phenomenon, especially in the Silicon Valley area. And we're going to be covering more of that right after this.
Welcome to the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. And now your hosts, Stephen White and Eric Worrell.
All right, today's featured article comes from Bloomberg.com, was written by Alista Bear and published on May 21st. The title of this Bloomberg article is "An RV Camp Sprang Up Outside of Google's Headquarters. Now Mountain View Wants to Ban It. With prices out of reach, where will the van dwellers go?" So again, just to recap, van dwellers, typically these are people who live not necessarily a nomadic lifestyle in that they're going all over the place. Sometimes they're just somebody who lives in a van, not Chris Farley style, van down by the river is where my mind goes to. But they live in a van because they can get around the cost of housing, whether that be a rental property or owning a home. And there is this movement of typically younger people doing this. And it's apparently, I don't want to say an epidemic because that word gets overused, but it's a pretty big issue out in Silicon Valley. So to start this out, we'll paint a lovely picture for you at the beginning of the article. It says, in a quiet neighborhood near Google's headquarters last month, rusty sewage was seeping from a parked RV onto an otherwise pristine street. Sergeant Wahid McGee of the Mountain View Police Department was furious. "You guys need to take care of it like ASAP," he said, lecturing the young couple living in the vehicle. "I'm not going to tow it today, but tomorrow if I come out here and it's like this, it's getting towed." As he delivered the ultimatum, a self-driving car rolled past. Mountain View is a wealthy town that's home to Alphabet Inc., the world's fourth most valuable public corporation and Google's owner. McGee spends a lot of his time knocking on the doors of RVs parked out in the city streets, logging license plates and marking rigs that haven't moved for several days. So this is the epicenter of the Silicon Valley tech boom that is minting millionaires, but also fueling a homeless crisis that the United Nations recently deemed a human rights violation. That sentence right there is pretty interesting. This isn't a United States situation. This was the United Nations recently deemed a human rights violation. So thousands of people live in RVs across San Francisco and the Border Bay area because they can't afford to rent or buy homes. Don't believe this is new information for most people who listen to this podcast. We know that the cost of housing in the Bay Area is crazy, but it's pretty interesting the fallout that happens from this. Like a lot of times we think immediately of homelessness or maybe people have to leave the area. But in this situation, it's not really either of those. People are still living in the area, but they're living in vans. And from the images, some of these are campers, traditional campers that you might see at a campsite, but some of them kind of look like Sprinter vans that people have set up and retrofitted for them to live in. And the one image here has got Google's headquarters. You can see the Google sign, and then it's just like campers and vans all around the Google sign. It said that you'll even see there's these multicolored Google bikes that are from the campus that'll be leaned up by these vans because people are getting out of the vans and going right to work at Google. There's a few different type of people I think that do this. There's some that maybe they have a lower level job there and can't afford a rental. But I also believe from reading, there's a few different subreddits. If you're familiar with reddit.com, social app, there's personal finance, financial independence, which is an interesting one. There's also one that's dedicated to van dwellers. And I've spent some time on all these, researching it and looking into it. And there are people who are on this FIRE path. So that's financial independence, retire early. And exactly what it sounds like, they want to become financially independent, retire early. And what they do is they have a skill set where they can be hired by somebody like Google, where you're going to make $150,000, $200,000 a year because A, you have a desirable skill set, but B, it's really expensive to live there, right? We got some information on the average rental property in this area, I think was $4,150 a month. I'll see if I can find that and verify it in the article here. But that's some crazy money to be spending on rent. So what some of these people who are really interested in FIRE are doing is they're getting a van, that might cost them $15,000 and living in it. And granted, you're probably going to have a tough time in the dating life or something like that. But if you're making $200,000 a year, and instead of immediately just giving back 50,000 of that to rent, maybe you bought a vehicle for 15,000, and suddenly your costs are way down, and you're showering at Google's headquarters, and you're doing everything else that you can to keep your job and keep your expenses as low as possible. So it's kind of this subculture of people that are not really living off the grid, because it's not like you can't find them, right? They're close to work, but they're living off the grid, so to speak, that they're living in vans. But a lot of them, are educated and making money. It's not just people who, are uneducated and can't find work. A lot of these people are working, but have decided that they're not going to spend $50,000 a year to live. Right here in the article, it says that the median rent in Mountain View almost doubled since late 2010 to $4,151 a month. So that's nearly triple the national average, according to Trulia. The median home value is $1.8 million, up from $750,000 10 years ago. So $4,151. Like, quick math, I'm thinking if it was $4,000 even, you're looking at $48,000 a year just for median rent. So that's a pretty crazy number to really wrap your head around. I mean, you can get like a low-level Mercedes new, and you can just buy one each year for that kind of money. I mean, you're buying essentially a low-level luxury car every single year just to rent and live. So it's a really interesting error, or I don't know if you want to call it an error, but situation that's unfolded out in San Francisco. And it kind of makes you wonder too, just from a capitalist mindset, of like, what kind of services will evolve from this? Like, is there somebody who's got a used van lot just outside of the Bay Area where he's selling all these? Or are there people that are, creating some sort of service where it might be able to come by and do sewage removal for cheap, or who knows? But anytime that one of the things then that we go back to a lot in this podcast is anytime that there's something extreme that happens, there's always these ancillary either benefits or fallouts that happen from it. So it's great that all this money and investment and technology booms are happening in this area. It's the epicenter of some of the most innovative companies and technologies in the world, and it's changing the way the world is, just this small Bay Area. But then at the same time, you're seeing that there's people who work for these companies that are changing the world and are deciding that they should live in a van instead of a rental property because it's too expensive. And there's just these fallouts that happen when, you see an extreme go one way. There's always something else that kind of falls out the backside of it where you're like, we didn't think about the fact that we can't pay teachers in San Francisco enough to live because we don't have a budget to pay teachers $150,000 a year, and that's what they need. So now what they have, and I think I've covered this on the podcast before, they have teachers that are either homeless or sleeping in vans or are commuting 2 hours out because it's impossible if they're working downtown San Francisco to be able to afford it. So it's a pretty interesting problem to have, in that based on just the geography of the land, if you have a school in downtown San Francisco, a public school, there's no way, unless that person has, a side hustle or a spouse who's making a lot of money, that somebody can afford to work as a teacher for under $100,000 in that area and not be living almost on the poverty line, which is crazy to think about. It's really hard numbers to kind of wrap your mind around if you're, a guy who grew up in Buffalo, New York, where, I could probably drive about 5 minutes and buy a rental property for $40,000. So really interesting stuff going on out there. If you're not on Reddit, I suggest checking it out. It's pretty cool. It's like, there's Facebook, which a lot of people are love-hate with, but with Reddit, there's you can get down into subreddits for niche topics that you're interested in. Like I said, I'm on personal finance, financial independence. I've poked around in van dwellers just because I'm fascinated by the psychology of it. I think it's really interesting too that you have some people in there who are high earners doing this just because they're like, I want to retire in 5 years at, 35. And then you have people in there that, are just nomadic and travel in the world that way. This just kind of got a weird sense of romance about it, right? But yeah, check out subreddit. I'll try and link to some of the ones that I like in the show notes of this episode 262. All right, guys. Well, until next week, have a great rest of your week and take care.